I would say maybe buy less and get excited about putting money in your savings account. So instead of buying a second pair of shoes like if you go to the grocery store, choose something that's a B Corp or 1% for the planet on the back of the label, and just keep doing that every time you go, and just smile, give yourself a pat on the back, and be okay with that small change.
Welcome to Brands for a Better World, the podcast that brings you the stories behind the people and products building a more just, healthy, and regenerative future for us all. Tune in weekly, and together, we'll learn about why these better products and brands were created, how they're helping fix broken systems, and what you can do to support them. My hope is that you'll discover some new brands to love and get some sparks of inspiration that will help you live your best life. Hi, I'm your host, Gage Mitchell, founder of Modern Species, a sustainable brand design agency helping better brands grow to scale their impact. If you like this show, please help it grow by leaving ratings and reviews on your podcast app and by sharing your favorite episodes with your friends. Maybe this will be one of them. On this episode, I'm speaking with Diana Ingles, eco-conscious designer at Rootlebox, about how we each found our way into sustainability, problems we're seeing with consumer culture, how we're approaching our work differently as designers trying to solve these problems, and some of the organizations, resources, and movements we're most excited about. Enjoy. It's called the Kirk and Kurtz podcast, but they start with like a pew, 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 like a celebration, kind of like electronic noise of how they all make those noises. So it's pretty funny. I should have some sound effects in here. I think that actually might be possible in Riverside too, but
that's funny. Let's just have fun.
Well, I'm excited to chat with you a little bit more today because I know our circles have been, or our worlds have been circling around each other a little bit and exchanging some emails and connecting in various ways. And I think what's interesting is we're both sustainable design or, eco-friendly design geeks trying to find better ways to create products or to create materials that have less waste, less toxins, less of that bad stuff, but ideally also contribute more positive stuff to the world.
Right.
I think I'm excited to geek out with you on some of those things, but I also like to start at the beginning. So maybe we just start like swapping stories on like where kind of sustainability started for us. And I think we both had like a common thread in food. So you want to start kind of talking about your kind of upbringing through food and sustainability?
Yeah. So I grew up on a family homestead in central Illinois, next door to my grandparents and my aunts and uncles, and we grew all of our own food. And I thought growing up that everybody did it that way. But as I become an adult in the real world and travel, I realized I had something very unique. And I used to think I was child labor, but then I realized now that my grandparents, I know I was child labor, but it was really great to grow up and see my grandpa's hands on things and my grandma showing me how to shuck peas and things like that. So I've been a eco-friendly graphic designer for some time now, but I have to say I wasn't from the get-go. And I think I got turned on to it from a brand called Alluvian and got hooked up with Living Ink where they were trying to get eco-enclosed to print with algae ink. And so a box I designed, they're like, hey, would you like to try this? And I'm like, well, I'll design it. You guys print it. And so I was the first box printed with algae ink. So nice. I love that street cred.
Do you get like a certificate or a ribbon or something like that for being first that you get to brag about for the rest of the...
I am on the video on Living Ink Tech. And nice. I had Scott on the podcast and he's like, before we go, I'd like to give you a shout out for being an early adopter. So I'm pretty excited. Nice. That's cool. That.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you?
I guess my journey into kind of impact and sustainability was similar from kind of a food perspective. And I didn't grow up on a farm, but my grandmother did. So she grew up in a farm with like 12 siblings and probably was also like the child labor of the farm, right? But grew up in that way and kind of went through the Great Depression. And so I think some of that mindset and practices kind of carried through the rest of her life. She went on to run a Airbnb or a bed and breakfast where she ran the kitchen and cooked. So she had a relationship with food there. And then by the time I came into the picture and knew her, she was always gardening and, growing a lot of her own food and making things from scratch and
preserving food in whatever way, like freezing it or canning it or different things like that. And all the celebrations at my grandmother's house would be kind of centered around food and, of course, like conversation and stuff. But there was always just so much delicious food, and still some of my favorite recipes of hers I still cook to this day, just because I love the food. But it wasn't like a fancy approach to food where we're making like these perfect little meals all decorated, etc. It was like just kind of a hearty, whole ingredients, made from scratch, with just the right combination of ingredients. And that's where my relationship with food, I believe, started. And my mother, growing up, was just working all the time. She's an entrepreneur, working kind of around the clock. So she would get groceries in the house, and then we were kind of like fend for ourselves most of the time. So I just started learning how to cook for myself early on as well. And just for the past, 40 years, probably close to, just been making most of my own meals, because I find that like I can kind of cook just as well as most restaurants and make it better and healthier and with ingredients that I know where they came from. So like my relationship with impact and sustainability, I think, started there, from like a grow your own food, which unfortunately I don't have a garden, but grow your own food, but make your own food, kind of have an understanding of where those ingredients are coming from. And then the more I started learning about the bad ways of growing food and all the monocultures that are depleting the soil, or the chemicals we're putting on things that kill all the pests, and also like poison the food, right? So I just started learning bit by bit about all the ways that we've broken the systems that were working just fine before we decided to change them. The more I got into asking deeper and deeper questions around, well, what else have we broken? What else can we fix? And that kind of started evolving into design. Like I felt like, similar to your point, felt like I was designing pretty trash, and that was just making rich people richer, and it just felt hollow and pointless. I knew I liked the idea of design and art and business and creativity and all that, but I felt like it was missing its purpose. So that's where like my food and sustainability kind of turned into health and wellness, and then it turned into a bigger picture of like asking questions of like, why are we doing things this way, or what's the end result of this, and how do we work backwards from a better result to design a path towards that. And it just opened up my mind to just questioning everything, essentially. And that continues.
So you found
today.
your ikigai, like what does the world need?
Right.
And how can you help, and how can you make money, and bam, there you go.
Right. And it's a process, right? Like I think there was like something of an aha moment, because after I had that realization, I took time off of work to just think and live. And during that time off, I had some realizations of, wait a minute, I don't have to just go work at some agency with random clients I don't care about, and, just to make a paycheck or whatever. I can try to find a way to work with clients whose businesses I think should exist in the world and whose products I would actually use. And then I also like had realizations that we design stuff maybe in Western cultures that we don't see as a problem, because we've got, landfills and stuff that we bury our problems. But I was traveling in Asia and saw all these things designed probably by Western cultures, like chip bags and water bottles and stuff just piled up on the streets. And there was nowhere for them to put them, because maybe in their culture they didn't have landfills or waste recovery system. They were used to like reusing things or compostable packaging. So it felt like there was a point where designers touched something, could have asked the right questions, but weren't, and could have made solutions that were better for the world and better for people, but just didn't think to ask those questions. So again, kind of tying it back to like, I found that curiosity of the power of just starting to ask questions of, what is this made of and why? And can it be made of something else? And where does it go after we're done with it? And wait, what are these inputs that we're putting in here? And are those good for people, bad for people? What happens in the waste stream when those enter the waste stream? Like if you just start asking questions, you'll open up all sorts of things that don't make sense, I think, about how we do things as a society. And then, anyway, so
I think a lot of brands don't realize that it's not hard to make the transition to doing that, because there's a lot of people that have come before them. And I think they also forget that you can brag about that.
Right.
And if you're bragging about it, on your packaging, people are going to see it on the shelf and they're going to go, oh, well, this is made with this. No brainer.
Right. How do you
You know?
keep that curiosity going, right? Because you were the first to use algae ink. So, like, for example, how did you even really dig into that? Or had you done other sustainable things ahead of that? Or how do you know what's next after algae ink? Like, how do you keep your curiosity flowing or your resources plentiful so that you're pushing the world forward instead of getting stuck in past solutions?
So for me, I always go back to being a feral child in the woods. And nobody wanted to babysit the Schneider children because we were so a little bit wild. But, I look back at that and I think that constant go outside, I'm locking the door, don't come back until the dinner bell rings. We went in the woods. We made our own clay. We made our own forts. And so I find going back to just being one with nature and hearing the creek trickle and the rustling of the leaves. Every time things get hard as far as like working on the brand with Wild Routed and doing packaging design, I remember that nature needs us. And I don't know if you know Lily Tomlin, but she's on a show. I think it's Grace and something. But she has a quote that says, man, I wish somebody would do something. And then she says, oh, wait, I am somebody. So even though I'm one person, I keep realizing that I have a ripple effect. And maybe sometimes people get tired of hearing me preach about, hey, are you going to recycle that? Or, hey, if you change that honeybee packaging from like really thick, non-recyclable plastic to a juice bottle, just that little change makes it cheaper to send it out in the mail, or it makes it easier to recycle. So I think growing up with nothing, like we were like poor, but we were family rich, I know I can live without anything.
Right.
So I just keep going because I'm excited about getting this back to where we were.
Yeah, there's so many good things you just said in there, but like the whole somebody should do something about this. Wait, I'm somebody is I feel like a big part of
you can't give up.
It's a big part of what drives me is this responsibility in some way. Like that's a big driver behind Modern Species and why we do what we do in terms of building more sustainable brands is because I felt like back to that idea of like a designer touched this somewhere. And if a designer has power to influence what materials or what colors or what shape or form or anything else like that is happening in this package or this brand or this website, then that power, I feel like, comes with the responsibility to make better choices, to ask the right questions, to specify things that are maybe going to be equally good for the product, but also better for the people or the planet. So it's that responsibility of, wait, I'm somebody. Like instead of saying somebody should figure out sustainable packaging or somebody should, support the good guys out there trying to do business in a better way. I think for me, it became that light bulb that went off was, wait, I'm somebody. I can do something about this. I can participate in this movement. I have skill sets that can contribute. I can ask the right questions instead of waiting for somebody else to give me permission or ask those questions. Like I can do it. And I think that's where a lot of my community building that I do through B Corp or AIGA or 1% for the Planet or these other organizations I've been involved with comes from is I think to myself, well, I wish there was XYZ in the community. And then I could sit around and wait for someone else to come up with that realization and decide it was their responsibility to do it. Or I can just get it started myself, right? So I love what you said there about I'm somebody. So why not step into that?
Mm-hmm.
I love connecting people and sharing resources. So let's take a pause from this conversation for a brief intro to a podcast you might be interested in.
Hey, this is Eric, the founder of the Climify podcast. What's Climify? Climify is an educational podcast that connects climate experts to design educators, students, and the design curious to bridge design practice and climate action to inspire listeners to envision and create a sustainable future. This season, we are trying to change the system. We're speaking with impact leaders at the intersection of climate action and design to change oppressive systems that limit us and hurt the environment. We'll provide insight, inspiration, practical resources, and tangible ways to measure impact. Each episode ends with a call to action, a design prompt from our experts, encouraging everyone to challenge how the world is designed and to become change agents in their own lives. You can subscribe to Climify at Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts.
And now, back to the conversation.
So why do people come to you with their product? Like, what attracts them to Modern Species?
That is a good question. We should ask them. No, I think when I talk to people about it, I think they come to us for a couple reasons. One is values aligned, right? They come to our website and they see that we have the same mission. Like, we're trying to make a just, healthy, and regenerative world with our product. And hey, that's exactly what you're trying to do with your agency. That's one reason. They just see the aligned values. Another reason would be they see work that they believe to be good work, like maybe in their own personal opinion, they like the design that's up there. But then I think a big driver too is just seeing the brands we've worked with and having respect for those brands, I think, is a big trigger too, because they come to our website and they say, oh my God, I love what Alter Eco is doing to, push regenerative agriculture forward and focus on sustainable packaging or whatever. Like, that's cool. We are like them or want to be like them or, think they're awesome. So, maybe we can work together too. So I think there's a few reasons there, but it depends on if you're talking from a, how do I close the deal standpoint, or like what draws them to us. And I think what draws them to us is that they see stuff they recognize and they see the shared values and they want to have a conversation from there.
Yeah. So with that, like we keep getting things like Sway, which is a film made from seaweed that's replacing a lot of plastic. And I see that Solani is doing that at Eco and Flows. They're testing that. So what are you most excited about as far as a material or a method as far as packaging?
I have been seeing things like Sway, like the seaweed, come up as a big prospect, because I've had clients that spend like 10 years trying to figure out a more sustainable, compostable stand-up pouch. And, they work their butt off on trying to find the right materials, because the stuff that was out in the market at the time was all made from like GMO corn or some other kind of things like that they realized, well, we're trying to sell like sustainable, organic, fair trade, regenerative, whatever products. We can't then package it in GMO corn. That doesn't make any sense. Yeah. So they worked to find other materials that were non-GMO and that were could be regeneratively or sustainably grown. So they found things like fast-growing trees or whatever fiber to make to use as the pulp that you could then turn into a bioplastic, and come up with solutions like that, which is great. But those solutions still have some of their own problems, right? Like breaking down some of those fibers into the plastic can have some chemicals in the process and stuff that can cause problems. Right. Whereas like seaweed, it's already a little bit more malleable. It's easier to just blend it up and extract the right ingredient that then creates these nice biopolymers. And it's renewable, right? It grows pretty quickly. And when you're growing it, it's also helping clean up the ocean. And it's got lots of different uses. Like, you can not just use it to, make sustainable plastics or vegan leather, but you can also use it as feed for fish or plants or other things like that. You can use it as ingredients in foods, because it's pretty healthy for people too. So it's one of those solutions where it checks lots of boxes and solves lots of problems at the same time, rather than just being like a little better in this area, but a problem in that area. And I think that's where a lot of sustainable solutions, I think, fall short, is not taking the whole system in mind, and you solve for one problem, but you cause 5 others, right? But something like a seaweed at the moment, I could dig in and maybe find some issues that it is causing. But at the moment, from what I've heard, it's more positive solution all around rather than a compromise.
It's the same thing with, I know it's not packaging, but it's the same thing with Miram. It's a plastic-free alternative to leather, and it's made with sustainable rubber and then ag waste. So you could literally take this and just throw it in the ground, and when you're done with it, so we're making like Apple Air tags out of it and things like that. Yeah, that's cool. And then coffee sleeves that we laser etch, so they're not even printed. The only thing is that there's no thread that isn't made with polyester right now that's strong. So it's those give and takes. You're trying to see, like, what material can I use that has the biggest impact, and then try to make the things that have a bad impact be the smallest component of your packaging.
Yeah, that makes sense.
No.
And another one I want to mention too is just give a shout out to a friend, Eric Benson with Renourish, and a professor at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. But he created a paper lab using agricultural byproducts or waste that you can take. I don't know. It's just maybe you're harvesting corn, let's say, and you can take all the leaves and the other bits of the stalk or something and use that, grind it up as pulp and make paper out of it. But that's just one random example. You can make it out of hemp. You can make it out of lots of different materials. But there's all these materials that are sometimes just burned or whatever in excess, or just byproducts of something else in the processing. And through a more of a circular economy lens, we can ask ourselves, like, what's currently a byproduct or a waste stream, and how do we turn that into a value add product? So I think that's one example of somebody just thinking a little bit more holistically and about the whole system, and seeing everything as a biological or technical nutrient instead of waste, right? Because that's the way nature works. Yeah. There is no waste. Like, everything is used, right? Yeah. So that's a human concept.
So one person's trash. Yeah, no doubt. So one person's trash is another person's treasure. And I think about a company that's here in Peoria, and that is Better Earth Logistics. And they basically collect restaurant waste, and then there's a kiosk that people can take their own compost. So if you live in the city here and you're not out in the country like we are, you're not going to be composting in the dirt. So you basically go to a kiosk and you swipe it, and they have this huge facility with, like, these huge machines that I think they even take bones and meat scraps because they cook it at such a high temperature. Wow. And then they take that trash and they turn it into gold, and they sell it for $7 a bag for compost that goes back into your soil. I think that's amazing.
Wow.
I think we're on a trend to see people wanting to do really good things like that.
Yeah, that's really cool. Yeah,
That's really inspiring.
I love stories like that where just approaching things from a different perspective can open up lots of different solutions. Like, we work a lot in the upcycled food space. And what I like about upcycled food, for example, is the idea that because we're trying to be, like, super efficient and with our mechanical processes, for example, we've got all these machines set up and we extract the one thing we want out of this food or agricultural product, and then everything else is just like, well, what do we do with this leftover stuff? And it often would maybe at best get composted, which is kind of a good solution. But according to the highest and best use, I think it's the EPA or whatever, has a diagram that shows, like, highest and best use for food. And obviously composting is putting it back into the earth, so it's good. But we've put all these resources into growing this stuff. Maybe we should actually put it into, like, human food first, or, animal food or whatever, and then, like, compost it as, like, a second option. But with upcycled food, basically, you're taking something that's already part of the process. Like, maybe you're making, one example from Dan Kurzrock of Regrained or Upcycled Food Inc. is you go through the brewing process, you grow all this grain for the beer. When the brewing process, you're basically just extracting the sugars out of that grain as part of the process, because the yeast then eats those sugars to create the alcohol. And of course, there's a sweetness to the beer, right? But afterwards, they've got all this spent grain, they call it, that normally just gets turned into pig feed or, composted or something like that. But there's still a lot of nutritional value, fiber, protein, other things like that in that spent grain. And hey, the sugar's been extracted, which is something that humans need to avoid a little bit more, right? So it's now this healthy food. All you have to do is kind of like dry it out, process it into like grind it up into a flour or something like that. And now you could put it in anything. You can make granola bars, pancake mix, brownies, like whatever. Now you can make these products healthier and use all this grain that we spent a lot of resources growing. So it makes reduces the impact of growing those grains, saves all that water from having to regrow grains to make the bread, because now you can just use the spent grain, right? So solutions like that, I feel like, are the way humans evolved, kind of like back to the story of my grandmother growing up on a farm and through the Great Depression. Like, they just found ways to use as much of the food as possible because it just makes sense, right? But we got in this industrial kind of food culture where you grow all these ingredients just to extract one little molecule from it, and everything else is waste, and that's just weird. So
it's maybe like people have a bias of like, here's what I need, but they're not thinking all this other stuff could also make them money. So I was in Chicago last summer about this time, meeting with the German Chamber of Commerce, and they had companies come over here that are making like little sauce packets and have all different kinds of ways of not creating wasteful packaging. And so the gentleman that was talking to the gentleman who was in charge of Chicago waste system, and then the lady who was in charge of St. Louis waste recycling system, they were all like sharing notes, which was really cool because in Germany, they don't have as much space as we have in the States. So they have to be really creative. So I was talking to them, and he said, well, waste is prohibited. Landfills are prohibited. Or forbidden was the word he used. And I'm like, well, then what do you do with it? And so they have to burn it. And then I was talking to Joey Pringle of the Vision. He has a couple of factories, one in Germany, I think, and then in a couple other places. And that's how I met him, was with Miriam. And he's making all kinds of things with, banana waste and pineapple waste and all that kind of stuff. So I think there's so many things out there that we can do with this waste that everyday people maybe aren't aware, that aren't in our space. And that's what I'm hoping this podcast can kind of share with our audience.
Yeah, that's great. And speaking of which, that's a good moment to because we're going to share this episode on both of our podcasts. So for my listeners,
right.
I'd love for you to talk a little bit about both your practice, but also your podcast. Like, back to the question you asked me is like, how are these opportunities finding you, or what kind of opportunities are coming in and fun stuff you're working on? And then what are you trying to accomplish with the podcast, or what should people follow it for?
Yeah, great segue. So for the podcast, I've always wanted to just talk to people. I really find that if you just listen, people will share information that you wouldn't get in a casual, hey, how's the weather situation. So I was always afraid of doing a podcast, but then my friend Chris Martin, who does podcast editing, he's like, I'll edit it for you and help you produce it. And so that took the technical component out of it. So then I could just be me and bring people on, like Living Ink Technologies, Scott Fulbright, What a Warm Soul. What he's doing is amazing with Algae Ink, and then Salani Doshi, among others that I've had on the show. And I'm just getting started. But I'm hoping just by being vulnerable and having conversations about things that you and I know about, that everyday people don't know about, that maybe that will have a ripple effect. So with that, I do try to make it a little bit of a segue into our brand. We make products for the national park stores and the monument stores. And the reason we're doing that is because when we walk into one of those, I see a lot of greenwashing, and I don't think people realize they're being greenwashed. So we're trying to give them options like Algae Ink printed graphic tees on, 100% Pima cotton. I know cotton's not the best, but it's better. And just doing things like with Miriam and printing, like we just did some postcards for Lake Tahoe that were printed in Algae Ink on FSC certified paper. So we're just really trying to bring that aspect of knowledge via the podcast into the national parks with our brand.
Nice. I love that. So is that people listening to your podcast are probably like other designer geeks like us, or people trying to build a business that are looking for more sustainable solutions, right? And you're sharing a lot of those solutions and strategies and just way of thinking differently about stuff.
Yep. And then I push them towards my website, Rootlebox. I've always wanted this resource page of where people can go to, and I'm like, again, why am I not doing it? So I'm turning my website eventually here, as soon as my husband gets done illustrating a coloring book, I'm turning it into completely a resource page so that people don't have to go search for information.
I love it.
Try to make it easier.
I'm just looking at the resource page now, and obviously a lot of shared alignment there and some things that we both like to support, like the living ink you've mentioned a couple times, the Hemlock printers who uses some of that living ink, but also does everything they can to print carbon neutrally. And then I see like Eco Enclose, 1% for the Planet, TerraCycle, some things like that that are great resources there. So I love that idea. And I giggled when you said I've been wanting to like have a resource page or create a resource page, because that's something that I've been meaning to do for a long time for Modern Species too, is have more of that resource section. But I feel like, you get so caught up doing all your client work that you don't always carve out the time to do the work you want to do for your agency at the same time. So I love that you're not,
Right.
that you're just diving in and getting started and creating that page, and instead of waiting for someone else to do it. Back to that whole conversation we started with too, right? That's cool. And hey, thanks for the shout out of the podcast on your resource page too. Love that.
Well, I've learned a lot from you.
Sweet. I love that. Appreciate it. I mean, that's part of why, well, the main reason I do the podcast too is to your point. I feel like the learning through the conversation was a nice byproduct of the podcast. Like, in fact, I would almost say it's like putting yourself through a master's or a PhD program if you keep doing it long enough, because you're getting to talk to really influential, brilliant people who are innovating in different ways, and you get to learn their challenges, their mistakes, or their philosophies, or their what inspired them, etc. So you absorb a lot of really great info by just having those conversations. But my point of it was I wanted to have those conversations so I could share them with others so they can also learn. But then I realized how much I get to learn too. So it's kind of like a nice selfish benefit of personal growth for myself. But like the idea was to just make it a resource for other people who are trying to build better products and better brands to make a better world. So that's why we're Brands for a Better World, because the idea, in my philosophy at least, is a B Corp and 1% for the planet and climate neutral or carbon neutral, all those kind of things. I feel like business is a powerful force for change. And the reason I say that is I also build a lot of communities and run a lot of nonprofits. And I do love that work too, but there is something more inherently sustainable about a business focused on good, because the business is self-sustaining, whereas a lot of the nonprofits or communities that I build are not self-sustaining. We need to find other revenue sources like membership dollars or donations or sponsors or other things like that to be able to do our work. Whereas, and some nonprofits are shifting to thinking more like a business, but when you're building a purpose-driven business, you get to not only make maybe the product or service impactful itself, but then you can use the profits from that business or service to also make an impact, right? To create a scholarship program, to donate back to the planet, to invest in people, invest in sustainable innovations like what you do. So it's a great opportunity.
Yeah, like 1% for the planet. You can go and like see where you want to send your dollars to by like using their interface to search for, like, for us, we give back to the national parks. We give 10% back to the conservancies.
Nice.
So we go and we're trying to help the people that we're working with as far as the buyers for the national park. We're like, hey, are you on 1% for the planet? And they're like, tell us more about that. I'm like, if you just apply to just be on it, people have another resource to give you some money.
Right.
So there's a lot of education there that people don't realize they can have access to.
Right. Yeah. I've gotten a few clients of ours, for example, to join the network that should have been on there anyway, but they weren't when I asked, when I asked that same question. And the beauty there is, then I can also donate some work to them and get some credit through 1% for the planet. Not that it's all about the credit, but I tend to like give too much away. So it's nice to just have at least some of it be like hey, look, I get credit for giving it away through my 1% for the planet commitment because I just donated all this time to the Upcycled Food Association, or I donate all this time.
I did not know that.
Yeah.
I didn't know that. You can donate your
Yeah,
talent.
so the way the 1% commitment works is that you're just committing to give 1% of your revenue, not your profits. And I think that's something that not everybody knows, because obviously a revenue is a much bigger number than your profits, especially if you don't make a profit. But with 1% for the planet, you donate even if you don't make a profit, right? So it's 1% of your revenue. And then, but how you stay committed to that 1% is you can do it in different ways. I think at least 50% of it, I believe, has to be in form of cash, but you can also volunteer, or you could give in-kind donations, or there's also this one I haven't tapped into yet, but there's if you invest in advertising for some of the nonprofits. So for example, if I wanted to put $10,000 into a campaign to raise awareness for some outdoor organization, that could also be considered part of my giving. But so what we mostly do is cash and then kind of pro bono or in-kind services. So like we'll work with some nonprofit, planet-focused nonprofits and donate a chunk of work to them in order to help move their work forward. And then, it's not like we get a tax write-off or anything for that. We just get to claim that as part of our 1% impact. So because of that, we usually end up more like 5-10% of the businesses contributed.
Well, that's cool. Now I know. That's cool.
And for anyone listening right now, you also don't have to be a business. You can be an individual that signs up for 1% for the planet too. And it can be 1% of your salary, your paycheck, but a lot of that can be done through volunteering as well. So if you're the type of person that wants to volunteer for planet-based organizations, you can sign up for 1% for the planet and have a little structure around that volunteering or giving.
Yeah, that's helpful because we get busy and we're like, I should do that. But if you have an organization that it's wrapped around like an embryo or a seed, you just keep going back to that seed and helping it grow.
Yeah, totally. So I know we've been talking about some of the positive impact we've been seeing, like Mirum or, upcycled food, or I've mentioned a little bit regenerative organic movements, but I'm curious, this is a somewhat unplanned question, but it just feels natural right now. What are some of the biggest challenges you're seeing? Like, what do we need to overcome as sustainable designers or sustainable businesses in order to get to the more preferred future?
So I think the thing that weighs me down is seeing kids being nervous about the future. And so helping them turn that frown upside down by taking action. I think it's frustrating when somebody comes to me with a packaging project and they're like, do people even really recycle? Does recycling really make a difference? And so I try to use real life stories, like talking to the lady that's in charge of the St. Louis Recycling State of the Art Center. I try to use real world examples because I know in a lot of places, every state's a little bit different. Every municipality is a little bit different. Some people recycle, some people don't. And it's getting a little political. So I think that weighs me down a little bit, but I still go back to being that kid in the woods, remembering a time when we didn't have landfills because they're only 70 years old. And I kind of lean into that. How about you?
Yeah, you just kind of lit something up for me, is just that communication is a challenge. And by which I mean, when I've worked in nonprofits, I know the biggest challenge is like communicating stuff from the national organization down to the chapters, or communicating stuff from the executive team down to the directors or chairs or committees or whatever. And there's all these barriers to communication, but the same thing goes for impact movements or sustainable brands or whatever, is how do we invite people along on this journey? How do we get to exponentially grow our impact by inviting other collaborators or inviting our consumers or customers in on the process? And sometimes there's these communication barriers, like what you were talking about, like people saying like, well, how do you recycle, or is recycling even worth it? Same thing in like organic movements. I'll hear one person say organic's the only true solution. And then other people be like, organic's corrupt and just a bunch of BS because the USDA organic watered it down or whatever. And so you have both those sides that creates this conflict, and then the general public maybe just reads one article or hears someone talk about how organic is BS or recycling is broken on social media. And now that's their philosophy. And now they plant that flag and decide, I'm not going to recycle because recycling's not working perfectly. So screw it. Or I'm not going to buy organic because organic system isn't set up as well as it could be. Like, and they decide that because it's not perfect, it's not worth participating in. So I think, and that's just a communication
I think
challenge.
Maybe
right?
they're looking. Yeah, they're looking for validation, because I know recycling is a challenge. You have to rinse things out. You have to peel the label off. It takes time. We're busy, but keep trying.
It's like every system we have created, at least in this country, I would say is not working really like super smoothly, right? I'm tempted to use the word broken for most of it, whether it's the financial injustice or the education system, the healthcare system, the waste recovery system, like pretty much name any system. And it's got lots of problems that need to be fixed. But do you decide, you know what, I'm never going to learn again because the education system's broken? Or do you say, you know what, the education system's broken, I'm going to work on fixing it. And I'm going to contribute to it in a positive way and hope that over time we'll see the change we need to make it a better system.
Yeah.
And I think that's the people that say it's not perfect, so I'm going to throw it out, or I'm going to avoid it, or I'm going to tell everyone to not pay attention to it. Like, I feel like that's a weird philosophy in my mind. Like, just because, again, the healthcare system's broken, does that mean you refuse to ever go see a doctor or a therapist or anything like that? Or does it mean know that it's broken, participate in it, and work to solve it or make changes wherever you can?
Yeah. So what would be like one actionable thing that people could take away today?
Ooh, based on this conversation, I feel like curiosity, like asking questions so you can see the whole system, right? Rather than just seeing the one piece that's exposed to you. And then participation. You are somebody. You can do something about it. You can participate. You don't have to ignore it. You can take a progress over perfection mindset and just participate. So be curious and show up, participate. What about yourself?
Great. I think we owe it to the kids of the world, because we're not going to be here when this all goes south. Right. It's not our planet anymore. It's theirs.
Yeah, I can't remember the quote, but I love this quote of like, be the type of person that will plant a tree that you yourself will never get to sit in the shade of, or something like that. Is kind of the mindset we need to be taking.
The greatest legacy.
Kind of we need to take the long view. What about you? What would you leave people with?
I would say maybe buy less and get excited about putting money in your savings account. So instead of buying a second pair of shoes, or maybe like if you go to the grocery store, choose something that's a B Corp or 1% for the planet on the back of the label, and just keep doing that every time you go, and just smile, give yourself a pat on the back, and be okay with that small change.
Right, like quantity or quality over quantity. Like instead of buying a bunch of cheap junk that you have to replace constantly because it's made poorly, buy the good thing once and it'll last, or something like that. And maybe to make buying good easier, on our Modern Species website, there's a impact guide tab where you can see the impact driven gift guide, where a handful of collaborators like Kate Fossen from Brand Pollinators and other folks, agencies and nonprofits and stuff, came together to curate a list of 70 plus products that would make great gifts, but happen to be B Corp certified or women owned or 1% for the planet or regenerative organic, etc. So if you don't know where to look,
I love your gift
start
guide.
there, look at the gift guide. I think.
Yep. Every holiday, I'm right there. And I'm like, okay, I didn't know this existed. I didn't know this existed. So it makes it easy to just go find a good, healthy list of things that people would love to get. And we try to give more food items for Christmas than other physical things. It just seems healthier and happier.
Nice, love it. Where should people go to learn more about what you're up to?
So my podcast, of course, Rootlebox.com, and I'm on Apple and Spotify. And then our brand, Wild Routed, we're trying to use our platform to teach anybody who would listen. I'm hoping to teach a class at Public Lands Alliance in Vegas next February to the national park buyers so that they can realize there's so many cool companies out there that they can just go to them instead of buying plastic. How about
Love
you?
it. modernspecies.com to just learn about our sustainable brand efforts and the brands that we support through our work. But like I said, there's the impact guide on there. And hopefully someday in the near future, I'll also have a resource section like you have.
Just steal mine.
Yeah,
Just take
where
mine.
you can get other cool resources. But in the meantime, just go to Rootlebox for the resource page there. And then the podcast, Brands for a Better World, is on all the different podcast platforms. You can check that out. It's also on our Modern Species website if you just want a quick link there. And then in terms of platforms I participated in most, I would say it's LinkedIn. So if you just want to have a conversation or see what I'm geeking out on a daily basis, follow me there. Just Gage Mitchell. Well, this is a fun conversation.
Should we end it there?
Appreciate the opportunity to geek out with you a little bit more on sustainable design, food systems, better
Same
business.
here.
I love it. Thank you.
Thanks for listening. To learn more about Diana, her agency, her brand, or her podcast, visit rootlebox.com. That's ROOTLEBOX.com. If you like this show, remember to help us grow by liking, reviewing, and sharing. If you're new here, don't forget we have over 100 episodes in the archive. Some might be called Evolve CPG, but it's the same show, so dig in for more goodness. If you consider yourself an impact-driven professional, join me over at impactdriven.community, where we're supporting each other's growth as impact leaders.